you're a yes person. Maybe you feel like I want to learn this and this and this and this. And yes, I'll take everything because you really truly want to do it. But we all have our capacity. And I think burnout is probably the number one reason why you should look at that task, or you should look at that responsibility you were just asked to do, a favor that turned into an expectation. And can you actually carry it through and see it through
And
in
do
a
a good job.
All right, we are here with another little podcast episode. We wanted to talk today about what happens when your boss piles on more responsibilities into your current role. Lisa and I have both experienced this, so we wanted to share a little bit about our experience as the employee, and then we'll kind of twist it like we always do and talk about it from a boss's perspective, and how you address it and things of that nature. So just to start things, Lisa, why don't you tell us about your experience having one role and then being asked to do other things. And we're defining this as something requested turns into an expectation. So that's kind of how we define adding on more responsibilities. So Lisa, why don't you introduce us to your experience in this?
Yeah. I can imagine that this is going to be a pretty common topic that happens to people with new initiatives or new products or services or anything that's rolled out. I think when you already have kind of yourself built into the company that you're working for, the agency that you're working for, I think that it's almost like common, I guess is the only word I can think of it, for your boss or leadership to come to you and say, hey, we're starting something new. We need your help with this. Can you oversee it? And then obviously being a good employee, you want to make sure that you knock it out of the park and that you do everything that you need to do. But the issue is that sometimes those new requests and your opportunity to kind of shine takes away from your actual primary job duties. And I think that that's where a lot of the kind of confusion comes, stress comes. I think that makes things a little bit more stressful, not only for you as an employee, but also for your boss. When things get missed, obviously on both sides, if it's your primary job, then, there's just, I guess, different prioritization that I think we'll get into in a little bit of how to kind of, I just guess, spend your time. But like I said, I think it's happened to probably a large majority of us, especially in the digital marketing agency world. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing, but I think that there needs to be expectations set on both sides that we'll talk about a little bit here. That it's going to just make it easier to handle, better expectations set, and better results ultimately for yourself and for your boss.
Right. Yeah, I've had this happen in a couple of roles. One being remote. I think it's almost, so I've obviously worked in-house and I've worked remote. The difference is that I feel like when you're remote, it's easier to say yes because you don't have to physically like change anything, right? You just literally just do something else, usually on your computer. So I think a remote job actually, you see this more often from my perspective, being asked to do other tasks or things that typically are outside of your role. The other thing is when you become the person who is kind of the ideal for that role, oftentimes a boss might see you as, oh, okay, great. Like now they can take on this because they've succeeded in their role. So I've had that happen too, where, I did a really good job. And while you think you can just like enjoy the motions of your own, they see you as potential and they want to give you more responsibilities. I had a job before where I was an account manager. It was when I was still new in my career in digital marketing. And I was really good at mentoring people. Once I learned something, I was really good at being able to teach other people. So that was like the beginning of my managerial career. But the only problem is that I was never really a manager with a title and the paycheck to go along with it. So while I had the stress of it, and I kind of just naturally fell into the role, it wasn't rewarded. So when this came up for Lisa and I, we were like, oh, you've definitely been there, the two of us. Again, specifically in digital marketing and in remote jobs where it's easy to be like, oh yeah, no problem, I'll help you with that. And then it just becomes an expectation that you have to do these things.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's our experience with that. As far as how to approach your boss, when I've had people here at the agency who have come to me and said like, hey, I have too much going on. We need to figure this out. The best way to approach it is to one, try and come with solutions. We talk about that a lot in our podcast. And it's because as people who oversee others, it's really hard to always be the person who comes up with a solution. And when anyone comes to me, I'm huge as far as like leadership goes. I've always felt like your mental health is primary. Like you can't do a good job until like mentally you're feeling good. So when people come to me and tell me they're overwhelmed, I almost feel like sometimes it's a little too late. So I'm trying to like make up for the fact that they've had to be stressed this long, because I think oftentimes we're stuck feeling like I can do this, I'll get through this, I'll push through this. And you don't really go to your boss until you literally at a point of just breaking.
Right.
And that's really hard as a boss to see that, because you ideally want them to feel proactive. Like as soon as it starts feeling like this is either an unhappy space for you to be in or it's too much, you hope that they raise their hand, but it's just not, I think, in our nature to want to do that. I think some people might see it as weak or whatever, that they've been conditioned to
Right.
feel when it comes.
Those same people that are just by nature, like you said, that are getting asked to do those extra things, and like because you know you
Right.
want to do everything that you possibly can, and I think bosses pick up on that too.
Right. Yeah. So I think from our perspective, um, it's tough to see if your boss cares, if your boss is one who is a little bit more on the nurturing side, perhaps they might actually sit down with you and go, okay, let's look at your workflow. Let's look at your calendar. Let's figure this out together and make it right. And I think that's what good bosses will do for you. If you have a boss who you go to and they're like, that's your problem, you probably should look for a new job.
Yeah, that's an
That's
easy.
that's never a good sign. So Lisa, why don't you tell us about when it's okay when you should say no? I think that's a good, this is really meant for people in our space who might face these things. So when is it a time to say no, and when is it okay to say yes?
I think to say no, I think, well, obviously, I don't think you should just go right up and say no. I think you should come to them, and because I think that there's likely discussion to be had around like your primary duties and how you're feeling and all of that. But I would say some kind of top times when you should at least have that conversation with your boss is if you're feeling burnt out, just like Brittany was saying, you can't, like whatever that saying is, putting on your own mask in the airplane. I think that that's super important. I think that that's super relevant, especially in like the agency life. Things do get super stressful. Burnout is awful. And I think a lot of people have that. And I think that is a good time. Like, hey, I'm burnt out. I don't know that I can take anything on. And with the hope of almost like bettering the agency. Like, I'm not going to do a good job at this. I'm super burnt out. I don't have the time to do it. I'm stressed, and you're probably not going to do a good job. And again, it's going to take away from your primary duties. So I think being burnt out is an okay time to say no, or have the discussion around saying no. If again, kind of circling back to that same point, if your primary job is suffering, if you were hired to do A and B, and now C is taking up 60% of your time, that means that you're not doing good at A and B, obviously. So you need to go and have that discussion around how that should be prioritized, or if it can be prioritized with the primary job that you're actually hired to do. A lot of times too, and I think that this is something that's common again, especially in digital marketing agencies, is if there's a gap to fill on a team or a responsibility that's not yours. I think that having that conversation as well, maybe there's someone better in the team that can maybe do a better job at you or than you. Like a good example of that is, I have a lot more experience with SEO than PPC. So I think that understanding what you're good at, what you're not good at, and not that you're not good at, but if there's someone that can do it better than you, that maybe should be doing it in your place as well. I think that that's also a conversation to be had. If there's no kind of like end game in sight, if it's overseeing a project with no end date or no sort of process or real plan around it, I think that's another good time to really kind of bring up, at least to get expectations. And again, I think expectations and solutions are two things that we probably bring up in every single podcast. And there's a reason for that, because expectations are huge. Without that, you have no basis of how anyone else is feeling. So just opening that up to the conversation as well. If what you're being asked to do, it's taking too much of your time and it's not contributing to your skill set or the goals that you have for yourself in your career, I think that's another time to kind of take a peek at that request and see if it could be better suited for somebody else, or, just again, have that conversation with the boss.
And I want to hit on burnout real quick, because I think this is very common in the marketing world.
100%.
We, as marketers, we live in a very high stress, fast pace, like the pressure is on to get people to grow people's bottom line. I mean, that's what we do for a living. And so I think burnout is very, very common. If you have a leadership role, it's also very common because you're trying to take care of a lot of things and you've got a lot on your plate. So recognizing when you're facing burnout is a whole other topic, I'm sure, in itself that we could go into.
Right.
But some of the key signs of that, just so people can take something away from this, is you're exhausted, you are missing things that normally you wouldn't, you're feeling disorganized. Even when you work 8, 9, 10 hours a day, you're still feeling like you can't catch up. And leaving work, you have anxiety, you have a lot of burnout actually affects our bodies. You're having trouble sleeping. So that's usually a big sign. I can usually tell when I'm starting to face burnout, which is common when you hold higher positions in these agencies. When I have trouble sleeping and I work out and I'm still having trouble sleeping, and also just like a physical reaction, like my appetite is gone, or I'm, like I joke that some of these clients give me heartburn, but it's a legit thing. Like it really has such an emotional effect on you. That's when you should actually just take a step back, take a deep breath, and then ask yourself, is this working? And it's really important, I think, that people don't sit and think that that's normal. And there's one thing about not enjoying your job, which this is not applying to. And there's another thing about just being overloaded because you've taken on too many things at once. Maybe you're a yes person. Maybe you feel like, I want to learn this and this and this and this. And yes, I'll take everything because you really, truly want to do it. But we all have our capacity. And I think burnout is probably the number one reason why you should look at that task, or you should look at that responsibility you were just asked to do, a favor that turned into an expectation. And can you actually carry it through and see it through?
And do a good job.
Yeah, and do a good job that you'd be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And as I mentioned, a good boss will sit down with you and actually figure out how to make it work if it is something you want to do. When I got in the sales position here, it was by chance. I was helping out, and then we were like, oh, okay, it works. And there are times when it becomes very overwhelming for me because I'm still running an agency outside of meeting with all of our potential partners and nurturing those relationships. And our boss sits down with me and we go through my calendar. We do all of these little steps and I breathe and I'm like, okay, I feel better. And sometimes you just need that. But I think that was just a good thing that you hit on, was burnout, because I think it's probably going to be the most common reason why you should actually maybe not take on that task.
Right. And I think, like, I'm just thinking if someone came to me and they're like, hey, I'm just burnt out. I don't know that I can do a good job at this right now. That's respectable to me, because in a way that means like you care more about the success of the company and the success of maybe a client project or something that you're working on, rather than just saying, okay, I'll do this and I'm probably not going to do a good job at it because I have a million other things to do. Like, that mindset is just difficult to overcome, and it's difficult to take on more stuff when you're already feeling that way, and you're just likely not going to do the job that you would typically do if you're feeling burnt out taking on new stuff consistently.
That's an excellent point. So how about the things we talk about when it's a good time? Lisa and I in this agency have both been promoted through essentially a course of just trying something out, seeing if we liked it, and if it was a good fit, it was a good fit, and you're able to be promoted. So I don't think you should take this as just because it's not your responsibilities, you shouldn't do it. I think that's actually a terrible mentality to have on a team. But there are ways now to say, like, it's a good time for me to take this new opportunity. Lisa, you want to cover those?
Yeah, I think probably the one that sticks out to me most would be if it's going to improve your skill set or help you reach your goals. A lot of times, especially if you're just starting out in an agency, maybe the job that you got is not your ideal career for the rest of your life. But if you have an opportunity even to be involved in something that's bigger than your current position, I think that that's most definitely a time to say yes. Any time that it might sound a little corny, but anytime that you get a chance to really kind of impress your boss or impress the higher ups, I think that 100% you should take that. Improving your skill set, 100% you should take that. And any other sort of like learning experience, especially when you're just starting out. It's obviously different throughout the different phases that you're in or how long you've been in digital marketing, but when you're new, you obviously have a little bit more bandwidth to take on these things where you can improve your skill set, where you can kind of get to the point where you can start reaching your goals, whether they're short-term or long-term. But I think overall, anytime that it's going to improve the way that you perform at the company, improve your chance of getting where you want to be in your career, or improve your boss's thought on how you are and how you perform. I would say that those are 3 good times to say yes, as long as you're not too burnt out from other things or anything like that.
Yeah. And the last thing I'd say is, are you looking for a raise? So let's talk a little bit about how you approach that conversation. We've had people that come to me and they have carried a responsibility. We've seen that it works well. And then we talk promotion, or annual raise or whatever it is at the time, because I think people deserve to be rewarded for their efforts. We just talked about this in another live episode, but you lose really good talent when you don't reward the talent for how much of an impact do these people make on your stress level, on your day, on your agency, on your clients. Like Lisa's role, for example, is, it's so valuable to have a really reliable person who has all the expertise to explain everything to our clients, who takes really good care of them, is approachable. She kind of checks all of our boxes in that sense. And so that is such a key role. You would reward that role, right? So it's the same in any case where you look at how are they contributing? And then when you're given extra things to do and you feel like you've done a really good job, how do you approach your boss with that? I usually would say the best thing to do is, 1, schedule a meeting. Don't have these conversations over Slack. Like, I don't know how many people have actually come to me before, but there's been a handful in my 4 years here that have come over Slack and asked for raises. And I'm like, let's schedule a call and actually talk about this. Yeah. A little weird. So I'd say don't do that. It's not a thing I'd recommend.
You can't even highlight yourself. Like it's a weird, different conversation to have, but like you should be proud of yourself and go into there and be looking forward to sharing all of the reasons that you have of why you should get this raise.
Yeah, Lisa and I actually, so we used to require that people did a presentation for their annual reviews, and it was what they could feel the most proud about, because I think everybody deserves to feel like they get that pat on the back. And I think it's an excellent way for your employees to shine and choose what they decide to show you, because you see everything throughout the year. But that was like Lisa just said, you should feel proud about the things you do. So going into those conversations and starting it with, hey, I'd love to discuss more about my role and the responsibilities that I've taken on, and I feel like I've done a great job and I'd like to talk a little bit more about this with you. You've opened the door, you've stated what your case is. You go into that conversation and you really should be able to show all of the different ways you've had an impact. And I think that's what really helps a boss, from my perspective. It reminds us of the value, because you have to remember, when you have one person who manages dozens of people, it can be a little bit tricky, and you shouldn't expect they're going to see everything that happens. And I think that's, when you can step into this and say, okay, here are all the things that I've done, and here's the impact it's had, and here's why I feel like, I'd love to discuss a raise with you, or here's what I feel like I should earn from this. And then you can go negotiate from there. But that's a good way to approach your boss, in my opinion, is to do it with thought first, and not just throw it on their plate in a chat. And then also show your value through your performance and what you've actually done that has had an impact on the agency that you're in. Lisa, you have anything else to contribute there?
No, I think we're lucky that we're in an industry to some extent where there's very hard data that you can show to prove what you've been working on, and there's actual numbers that you can speak to rather than just kind of telling that story. So take advantage of that. Cold hard data, nothing beats it.
I know, we're all a bunch of nerds around here. We love our data. Okay, cool. Well, I think this kind of gives people an idea of what we wanted to discuss as far as taking on new roles, when to do it, when to not do it. And if you feel like you're being taken advantage of, address it. I think I've had one instance where we actually asked someone to do something for us, and they were so stuck on their own role that I actually was like, ooh, I don't know if I like having this team member, not because they disagree with me and they don't want to do it, but it's just the demeanor. It's not hey, I'm actually at capacity, I don't think we can take this on. It really was just say, that's not my job. That's never the mentality you should have, is
Right.
that's not my job. That's not my responsibility. I think you just have to address it from more of a, can I do this successfully?
Right,
And
exactly.
if you've done it, great. And if you want to learn it, great. And just take it from there. But okay, cool. Well, this was our little episode short that we wanted to just get out there in our topic here about roles and responsibilities. And if you guys ever have any questions, you can leave a comment and we'll answer it. See ya.
Bye, guys.